Antonio. So
Hello.
lovely for us to be talking today in regards to your Yoga for Grief Relief Retreat, which is occurring here in the Bahamas in June. So we have a couple questions today. First, what is the Yoga for Grief Relief Retreat, and what does a day for a student look like in the retreat?
All right. It's good to see you. And it's good to see everyone as well. And the Yoga for Grief Relief Retreat is an opportunity, number one, to retreat. So to be away from the daily demands of everyday life and of the relationships that we have every day in our lives as well, so we can be a little bit with ourselves. Now, a grief retreat. Grief, even though it is a very normal reaction to the loss of things or people we are attached to, it is so convoluted, it is so painful, it is so multi-layered that often we shy away from this experience. We don't talk about it very much. We don't expose our grieving hearts often to other people. We don't enjoy necessarily being with other people who are in grief as well. So this is an opportunity to, while retrieving, be able to be with one's own grief, to take a look at how we personally grieve, what are our losses, and what are the significance of those losses, and how can we learn to live with those losses. And so it's an opportunity to isolate a little bit from everyday life, and on the other hand, to take a look at this experience of grief that we usually shy away from. And the way it goes is usually the first day of the retreat, we dedicate a lot of time to receive information about grief, to normalize it, because as I was saying before, it is such a convoluted experience, such a multi-layered experience, that we all think that it is not normal. And it is normal. We all grieve. There's no way out of it. And so to analyze how it is normal, what are the normal symptoms of grief, what types of losses can derive in a grief process, whether only losses that relate to death or losses that also relate to things are or not valid for us to grieve, and what are perhaps the normal tasks that any grieving individual may need to accomplish in order to transit the normal process of grief. These are the things that we discussed the first day. We talk a lot about it, as I said, with the intention of normalizing. And then from that day on, the other 3 days, we practice. First thing in the morning, we practice. Is a 2.5 hour practice. Is the program, the sadhana that I have integrated to address the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual symptoms of grief. We practice it, and then we take a look at together what are the emerging issues that come out of that practice. This practice involves certain areas of the body where grief is processed, mainly the thoracic part of our body, and how we hold certain feelings in certain muscles, and how moving those muscles make those feelings more available, make those feelings more present in our awareness, so we can take a look at them and understand who we are and how we are grieving. And then throughout the day, we have opportunities to do some self-reflective activities, such as, for example, filling out some tables or charts that allow us to see where we are at in the grieving process. Even though we all grieve, none of us do it in the same way as another person, not two individuals grieving the same way. And so in order to understand how we grieve, I offer some charts that give us the opportunity to reflect on how is it that we are grieving. And as the retreat progresses, we also try to tap into the most important aspect of grief, which is its relationship with attachment. As I said before, grief is the normal reaction to the loss of things or people we are attached to. And as we know, attachment is a very important issue in yoga. And it is the cause of a lot of suffering, as Patanjali said. To understand or to believe that our well-being, our safety, and our happiness depend on the presence of things or the constant availability of people is a big problem, because everything is going to go, because nothing is permanent, because all things are impermanent. And even though this is one of the most important sats or divine truths that in yoga we try to understand, analyze, and abide by, in regular life we tend to not remember this, and to think that those people we are attached to will be there forever. Those things that provide us with our safety will be there forever. And so, of course, when they disappear, we suffer tremendously. And so how to differentiate that extra suffering that we add to the already painful experience of loss is a big part of the retreat. And that's what we do.
Excellent. So from your point of view, who would take this retreat and why would they take it?
Well, I would say everybody could, because as I said before, we are not accustomed to taking a look at grief or looking at grief in the eyes. And it is a very important experience. So particularly someone who's grieving, someone who had experienced a loss recently, or that perhaps is not recent, but one has a little bit of a feeling that something has not completely gone right, or that we have not completely grieved the loss of a person or a thing. And by a thing, I mean that perhaps somebody has lost a house to a fire, or even somebody has lost a precious ring that has been given to them. And sometimes those losses as well are a valid cause of grief. We not always tend to acknowledge it. And so anybody who has experienced a loss could come to this retreat, as well as those working with the grieving individuals, because it is important to remember that, as Stephen Levine said, you can only help a person grieving up to the extent that you know your own. So tapping into one's own grief is one of the most important assets for those of us who are working with grieving individuals. And so both those who are grieving on one hand and those who are working with the grieving individuals would benefit from coming to this retreat.
And so what are the why of that question is, so what are some of these benefits? If you had to give a shorthand list, let's say a list of 5 benefits, 5 reasons why, 5 things that takeaways that someone would leave the retreat with, what would those things be?
Well, one of them would be to get to know oneself, because I would say that reduce the suffering of grief would be one of them. To receive important information about grief and about how to process it in a healthy, normal, effective way, because this is one of the main questions of everybody grieving. What can I do? Once you tell them, yes, there's a lot of suffering. Well, thank you, I know that. And there's a lot of symptoms. Yes, I have them all. And it is very convoluted. Yes, that's how I feel. Now, what can I do with that? And so there is a concept of tasks of mourning brought to the field by William Worden, who said that in order to process grief, we have to accomplish 4 main tasks: to accept the reality of the loss, to process the pain of grief, to adjust to the new reality, and to establish an enduring connection as one embarks in a new life, because as we all know, life continues. And so perhaps understanding those 4 tasks and taking a look at where we are at and what do we need in order to accomplish those tasks are one of the big takeaways from the retreat, because it's a little bit like finding out that there is a roadmap, that in this situation that seems so terrible, there is a roadmap, there is something to do. And so to get a sense of that roadmap and understand where we are in it is one of the also takeaways. I would say that because we identify ourselves through our attachments. If we are attached to the ashram and one day there's a big storm and we say, oh God, we were hit by the storm. And we were not hit. Maybe we were not even in the ashram, but we say we because we identify ourselves through our attachments. When the things and people we are attached to disappear, part of that identity goes as well, and we no longer know who we are. And so I would say that finding out who we are, taking a look at our grief and understanding how it can inform us about who we are and how we live our lives and how we relate to others is one of the most important takeaways of the retreat.
Excellent. So how many times have you done this retreat with us? Well, a couple of times.
Many times. I've been in this field for over 35 years. So I have done this in lots of different settings and lots of different situations, and anywhere from wonderful 4, 5, 6 day retreats to sometimes having to just be one day there working with people, like when I went to Hope Island after the hurricane, and I was able to work in a synthetic way, in a condensed way with people.
What is one of your most memorable teaching experiences, whether it's from your point of view or from the point of view of the student?
Well, I think that they mostly relate to that possibility of identifying oneself. So my memorable experience all relate to people coming out on the other side of the tunnel of grief and finding and seeing them come into the retreat with a huge sense of loss and themselves being lost themselves, thinking that they are not doing well, that they don't know how to do this. And then on the other side, finding that thanks to the grief, thanks to tapping into the grief, they can find who they are. And most importantly, sometimes that there is a way of continuing being connected with those people that we have lost or those things we have lost. My mentor and teacher, Lim Prashant, once taught me that our beloveds remain woven in the tapestry of our hearts. And that is such a beautiful way of understanding. And sometimes for people who come to the retreat, desperate, thinking that they will never be able to continue being in connection with those who they have lost, and then finding out that there are ways to cater to and to enhance and to nurture that continuation of the bond is definitely a memorable experience.
And my last question today is, what are some things that might surprise people about grief?
Well, I would say that, first of all, that it is normal. Because we all come to our grief thinking that we are the only ones, that no one understands what we're going through, that we're doing it worse than anybody else, that everybody else grieves in a better way. And so to understand that this is a normal process, that is not an illness. This is why in this field we don't speak about healing from grief, because grief is not a condition. Unless, of course, it is. I'm talking about normal grief. Sometimes grief can end up being a condition, but that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about complicated grief or prolonged grief. We're talking about normal grief. So the fact that it is normal is one of the most important things. I would say that it is very surprising for people to understand that non-death related losses are a valid cause of grief. And that a lot of people say, I just lost my dog, or I just lost my house to a fire. So, other people have lost family members, and they don't understand, and they're surprised understanding then that non-death related losses are as much a cause of grief as any other loss. And the third one, I would say, is the relationship itself with attachment or to attachment. Because particularly in the West, we understand that grief and love are the same thing. There is a very famous phrase by Queen Elizabeth. She said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." Mm. And everybody goes, "Oh," and Unfortunately, the queen was not truthful in that moment, because grief is the price we pay for attachment, not for love. Love is the coin. Continuing with the love bond is one of the most important pursuits of both grief therapy and grief counseling. And this idea that we have that if you love me, you want me there is signaled by attachment. And as we know from yoga, and particularly from bhakti yoga, attachment and love are not the same, but they are actually opposite. Because if you're attached to me, you love me being there, not me. You don't love me. You love my presence, but not love me. So attachment is a form of conditional love. And when people can break the chains of attachment in their love relationships, that is a surprising experience. How we can love without attachment, that is truly a surprising experience that I have enjoyed throughout the years, witnessing people coming to an understanding.
So really, it's both a retreat for grief, but also a retreat to teach you how to love without attachments.
Absolutely, in a way, it is correct, and it is a fascinating process, a freeing process. And so many times we have heard so many yoga masters speak about the freedom from attachment as a true form of freedom and as a true pursuit of yoga. Let's remember that in order to achieve spiritual success in yoga, we are to practice abhyasa, and we are to not be attached, vairagya. We are to have a life of non-attachment. And of course, it's not easy. We come hardwired for attachment to this life, and it's very hard to do it. And it is possible. And I believe this retreat is a very practical opportunity to understand and to practice this sat, this essential truth that governs the universe and creation.
Excellent. So thank you for answering all my questions, and I look forward to seeing you here for the retreat, which is June 16th to the 19th in the Bahamas, and excited to see the students come and the magic that will be made.
Absolutely, as well, and myself. And also I have led these retreats in different settings and parts of the world. And I have to say that the astonishing beauty of the environment in Bahamas and the very serious ashram life and yogic life that is offered in the Bahamas are an outstanding opportunity to really dive into this process in a serious, committed way that is surprising and yet possible. We can grieve in a beautiful place.
That is true. Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya.